Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are embarking on a journey through the vast and echoing halls of Greek mythology. It is a story not of dusty books, but of blood, thunder, and the very foundations of human nature. Before there were cities of marble or songs of war, there was a world of shadows and elemental force. We will travel from the yawning void of chaos to the heights of Mount Olympus, following the rise and fall of titans, the schemes of gods, and the tragic glory of heroes. Let me know where in the world you are joining us from tonight as we settle in. Whether you seek the wisdom of Athena or the fury of Zeus, these tales belong to all of us. They are the mirrors in which we see our own pride and our own love. Get cozy, settle in, and let us begin. In the beginning, there was no Olympus, no earth, no sea, and no sky. There was only chaos. And chaos was not the kind of chaos modern tongues describe. It was not mere disorder, or confusion, or a frenzy of matter. It was something much older than language itself. Chaos was a yawning void. It was a gaping nothingness without form or direction. It was an absence so absolute that even the concept of space did not yet exist. It was not evil, nor was it good. It was not even neutral. It simply was. From that ancient and silent nothing came the first stirrings of existence. These were the primordials, the first great pillars of the cosmos. First came Gaia, the earth, vast and unshaking. She was the foundation upon which all things would one day rest. She was the mother of all, the deep and fertile ground. Then came Tartarus, the abyss beneath the earth. He was not merely a place of punishment, but a dark and dreadful hollow far below the roots of the world. And then came Eros, the force of love and desire. He was the binding agent of all future creation, the urge that drives one thing to meet another and bring forth life. These were not gods as we think of them, not yet. They were elemental truths given form and weight. Then came Nyx, the night, clothed in a shadow so thick and heavy that even the void of chaos seemed to recoil. She was followed by Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, who would dwell beside her in that early and infinite silence. They were the shadows before the light, the cold before the warmth. From the union of night and darkness came something new and unexpected. They brought forth ether, the pure upper air breathed by the gods, and Hemera, the day. Hemera was fated from the very beginning to chase her mother, Nyx, endlessly across the sky. Thus, the cycle of night and day was born not through the laws of science, but through myth, through a family of strange and invisible primordials who lit and dimmed the sky with each passing hour. Gaia, the earth herself, did not lie idle in this new world. She was patient and fertile beyond measure. From her own body, and without a partner, she brought forth Uranus, the sky. He was vast and star-strewn, a mirror of her own greatness. He was both her son and her consort. And when he arched over her, stretching across the heavens from one horizon to the other, the world found its first true shape. It became a domed sky above a broad and endless plain. Gaia also birthed the mountains, tall and wild, and Pontus, the sea, who surged with a will of his own long before ships or sea monsters ever touched his waters. Together, earth and sky became the first great pair of the cosmos. Their union was the first marriage, a joining of the heights and the depths. This union brought forth the Titans, the first generation of powerful beings who would rule the cosmos long before Zeus and his kin ever rose to power. There were 12 Titans in all, 6 sons and 6 daughters. Each of them was vast and elemental in their own right. There was Oceanus, the encircling river that flowed around the edge of the world. There was Hyperion, the Lord of Light, and Coeus, the Inquirer. There was Crius, the constellation-bearer, and Iapetus, who would one day become the ancestor of men. Finally, there was Cronus, the youngest and most cunning of them all. Among the daughters, Gaia and Uranus brought forth Thea, the shining mother of the sun and moon. There was Rhea, the future mother of the gods, and the Mys, the embodiment of divine law and order. There was Mnemosyne, the memory of all things, and Phoebe, the radiant one. And then there was Tessis, the nourishing sea. These titans were the first architects of the universe, the ones who gave name and function to the elements that chaos had once held in silence. But the womb of Gaia was not finished with them yet. She bore other children as well, beings of incredible strength and dread. First came the Cyclopes. These were Brontes, Steropes, and Arges. Each of them had a single eye that burned like a forge in the center of their brow. They were the smiths of lightning, strong and simple in their power. They feared no god and no giant. They were the masters of the storm. After them came the Hecatoncheirs, the 100-handed ones. Each of them was enormous and terrible to behold. They had 50 heads and 100 arms each. They were capable of stirring the very foundations of the world when they were enraged. They were the living embodiments of raw and uncontrollable force. Uranus, though he was the lord of the sky, trembled at the sight of these monstrous offspring. He looked upon the Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants, and he did not see sons. He saw only a threat to his own dominion. He was ashamed and frightened by their grotesque strength. With swift and cruel judgment, he forced them back into the womb of Gaia, the depths of the earth itself. He sealed them there, hidden away beneath layers of rock and grief, where no light could reach them and no voice could echo. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. The earth, once proud and nurturing, now suffered with every breath she took. Her children were trapped within her, pushing against her bones and crying out in the dark. It was not only the agony of bearing them within her again that pained her, but the betrayal of her consort. Uranus, the sky, who should have cherished their children as she did, had turned his back on them. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, pressing the heavens down to meet the earth, blind to her pain and deaf to her grief. He was the first tyrant of the cosmos, ruling through fear and suppression. She could endure it no longer. In the deepest parts of her being, Gaia began to scheme. She reached into her own flesh and fashioned a weapon. It was not made of bronze or iron, for such things had not yet been dreamed of by the minds of men. Instead, she fashioned a great sickle of unyielding flint. It was jagged as truth and sharp as vengeance. Then she went to her Titan sons, the firstborn and mightiest among her children, and laid bare her suffering. "Your father has wronged me," she told them. "He has caged your brothers in the dark. He has silenced the womb that bore you. Who among you will aid me in ending this cruelty?" One by one, the Titans turned away. They were fearful of their father's might. They saw the vastness of the sky above them, and they trembled. Only Cronus, the youngest, stepped forward. He was the shrewd one. He had watchful eyes and a patient heart. "I will do it," he said. "Give me the blade." Gaia set the trap with the precision of a predator. She waited for the sun to set and for the stars to emerge. She waited for Uranus to descend as he always did, laying himself across her in the dark. And from the shadows, where he had been hiding, Cronus sprang. With a steady hand and no hesitation, he brought the flint sickle down upon his father. The sky shook with the cry of Uranus as the blade bit deep. It was a wound that severed the source of his power and ended the first age of the world. Cronus cast the blooded flesh of his father into the sea. From that act of violence came things of strange and terrible beauty. From the crimson foam that rose upon the waves, something new was born. A figure of impossible beauty, radiant and irresistible, emerged from the white froth. This was Aphrodite, the goddess of love and desire. She was born of the sky and the sea, untouched by the violence of her origin. She stepped ashore at Cyprus, serene and powerful, a force that would later cause kings to fall and empires to burn. But the vengeance of Gaia did not end with the birth of beauty. From the droplets of blood that fell upon the earth, other beings sprang into existence. There were the Furies, cloaked in shadow and vengeance, who would haunt oath breakers and kinslayers until the end of days. There were the Giants, who would in time rise up against the gods themselves. And there were the Melee, the nymphs of the ash trees, who would become the guardians of the wild and the old ways. Uranus, wounded and dethroned, vanished into the highest heavens. He left the world to his children, but he did not leave in silence. Before he fled, it is said he spoke a final curse. It was a curse that would ring through time like a heavy bell. Just as I was overthrown by my son, he said, so too shall you be overthrown by your own. It was not a prophecy he had invented, but a truth that Gaia had already whispered in the dark. Cronus heard the words well. He took the sky throne for himself and wrapped himself in the power of the cosmos. He freed his Titan brothers and sisters, and for a moment the earth breathed anew. The sky was no longer pressed so tightly against the ground. The world had found its space. But from the moment Cronus grasped the scepter of power, he began to fear. He looked at the throne, and he looked at the horizon, and he remembered his father's words. Thus ended the reign of Uranus, the first king of the cosmos, and thus began the age of the Titans. Yet already, in the silent womb of time, the next storm was stirring. The cycle of power and rebellion had begun, and it would not stop until the world was broken and remade once more. Cronus stood upon the peak of the world. The blood of his father, Uranus, had been cast into the sea, and the sky had retreated into the high, distant heavens. The suffocating weight of the sky no longer pressed against the earth, and for a moment there was a profound and heavy silence. Cronus, the youngest and most cunning of the Titans, held the flint sickle in his hand. It was a blade stained with the very origin of his power. He was now the king of the cosmos. Beside him stood his siblings, the Titans, who had been freed from the depths of the earth. Together, they looked upon a world that was still young, still wild, and waiting to be shaped. This was the beginning of the age of the Titans. It was a time of immense power and strange, quiet peace. Under the rule of Cronus, a new race of beings appeared. The first humans. The poets would later call them the Golden Race. These were not the men of today, burdened by toil and sorrow. They were creatures of ease, living like gods themselves, their hearts free from care. The earth provided everything they needed without the need for a plough. They did not age, and when death finally came, it felt like falling into a gentle sleep. It was a golden age, indeed, but it was built upon a foundation of fear. Cronus was a king who could not forget. He could not forget the scream of his father as he was cast down, and he could not forget the curse Uranus had spoken with his final, wounded breath. Just as I was overthrown by my son, so too shall you be overthrown by yours. Those words rattled in the mind of Cronus like a stone in a jar. He took his sister Rhea as his queen, and though their union should have been a source of strength, it became a source of terror. Rhea was a goddess of earth and flow, patient and nurturing. But as she began to bear children, the shadow of the prophecy deepened. First came Hestia, the spirit of the hearth. Then Demeter, the lady of the grain. Then Hera, who would one day be queen of heaven. Then came Hades, the lord of the dark, and Poseidon, the shaker of the earth. But none of them ever felt the warmth of a mother's arms. None of them ever knew the light of the sun. As each child was born, as each small cry filled the air, Cronus stepped forward. He did not look with love at his offspring. He looked at them with the cold eyes of a man protecting a throne. One by one, he took the infants from Rhea and swallowed them whole. Imagine the grief of a mother whose children are silenced before they have ever seen the sky. Within the dark belly of Cronus, the 5 siblings lived on, for they were immortal and could not die. They grew in the darkness, waiting in a place where time did not move. Rhea wept until her tears became rivers. She begged her husband to stop, to show mercy, but Cronus was deaf to her pleas. To him, these were not children. They were rivals. They were the fulfillment of a doom he intended to outrun. But fate is not a thing that can be outrun. When Rhea found herself with child for the 6th time, she went to her mother, Gaia. She sought a way to break the cycle of hunger and fear. Gaia, who had never forgiven Cronus for leaving the 100-handed ones and the Cyclopes in their prison, whispered a plan. When the time came for the child to be born, Rhea did not stay in the high halls of the Titans. She fled into the night, traveling to the island of Crete, to the hidden shadows of Mount Ida. There, in a deep and sacred cave, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. The air of the cave was cool and thick with the scent of ancient stone. To protect the child, Rhea left him in the care of the nymphs and the divine goat Amalpha, whose milk gave the infant the strength of a god. She also summoned the Curites, armored warriors who danced outside the cave. Whenever the infant Zeus cried, the Curites clashed their shields and spears together, creating a din that drowned out his voice so that Cronus, searching the heavens, would hear nothing. Rhea returned to her husband with a bundle of swaddling clothes. Inside, she had placed not a child, but a large, heavy stone. Cronus, blinded by his own paranoia and greed, did not even look at the face of what he thought was his son. He seized the bundle and swallowed the stone, believing he had finally secured his reign forever. But high on the slopes of Crete, the true king was growing. Zeus grew quickly. He was not like his brothers and sisters. He had never known the darkness of his father's womb. He knew the wind, the sun, and the milk of the wild. He was a creature of the open sky. As he reached manhood, his heart filled with the same fire that had once driven his father to rebellion. But Zeus was not merely a warrior. He was a student of the world. He met the goddess Metis, the embodiment of wisdom and cunning. She told him that to defeat Cronus, he would need more than strength. He would need to free those who had been swallowed. Together, they crafted a potion, a mixture of herbs and ancient magic. Zeus, disguised as a cupbearer, returned to the court of the Titans. He stood before his father, a king who had grown old in his suspicion, and offered him a drink. Cronus took the cup and drank deeply. Within moments, his body convulsed. The potion did its work. With a roar that shook the mountains, Cronus vomited forth the stone he had swallowed so long ago. And then, one by one, his children emerged. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon stepped out into the light. They were fully grown, their eyes bright with the hunger for vengeance. They looked upon their brother Zeus and recognized him as their leader. The siblings fled to the heights of Mount Olympus, and from that peak they declared war upon the Titans. This was the Titanomachy, a war that lasted 10 long years. It was a conflict that tore the world asunder. The Titans gathered on Mount Oris, while the young gods held Olympus. Every day, the earth groaned beneath the weight of their battles. Mountains were uprooted and cast like stones. The seas boiled as Poseidon struck the waves. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and fire. For a decade, neither side could find the advantage. The Titans were ancient and vast. Their strength was elemental and deep. The Olympians were young and swift, but they lacked the final weapon to break the stalemate. Once again, it was Gaia who provided the key. She told Zeus that he could never win unless he freed the siblings of the Titans, the ones Uranus had feared and Cronus had ignored. Zeus descended into the blackest depths of Tartarus, past the gates of bronze and the walls of shadow. He found the 3 Cyclopes and the 300-handed ones, chained and forgotten in the dark. He broke their bonds and led them back into the light. In gratitude, the Cyclopes, who were master smiths of the divine, forged weapons for the brothers. For Zeus, they crafted the thunderbolt, a shaft of pure fire that could shatter the foundations of the world. For Poseidon, they made the trident, which could stir the oceans and shake the earth. For Hades, they fashioned the helm of darkness, which rendered the wearer invisible even to the eyes of the gods. The final battle was a cataclysm. The 100-handed ones stood beside the Olympians, their 300 arms hurling rocks the size of islands at the Titan ranks. Zeus stood upon the summit of the world and unleashed his lightning. The sky turned white with fury. The Titans fought with the strength of the mountains themselves, but they could not withstand the combined force of the lightning, the sea, and the darkness. One by one, they were driven back. Cronus, the king who had swallowed his own future, was finally overcome. The war ended with a silence as profound as the one that had followed the fall of Uranus. The Titans were defeated. Zeus did not kill them, for they were immortal, but he cast them down into the very pit where they had left their brothers. He imprisoned them in Tartarus, behind gates of bronze that could never be opened. The 100-handed ones were set as guards over the prison, ensuring that the age of the Titans would never return. The cosmos was now in the hands of the 3 brothers. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades stood together in the ruins of the old world. They did not fight for the throne. Instead, they decided to let fate choose their paths. They took a helmet and placed 3 lots inside, each representing a realm of existence. They shook the helmet and they drew. To Zeus fell the sky. He became the lord of the thunder and the clouds, the high king of Olympus who would oversee the heavens and the earth. To Poseidon fell the sea. He took his trident and descended into the deep, building a palace of coral and pearl, ruling over the tides and the creatures of the salt. To Hades fell the underworld. He became the lord of the dead, the silent king who would guard the souls of all who had passed away, ruling a realm where the sun never reached. The world was divided, the order was set, and the reign of the Titans was over. But as the brothers took their thrones, they knew the cost of power. They had seen their father fall, just as his father had fallen before him. The age of the gods had begun, but the shadows of the past were long. The earth was still filled with monsters, mysteries, and the seeds of a new race of heroes. The golden age was gone, and a new, more complicated era was rising from the ash. The sky was high, the sea was deep, and the darkness was waiting. For though the Titans were chained, the earth herself was not yet finished with her children. Zeus sat upon his throne, the lightning in his hand, watching a world that was finally his to rule. The world was quiet for a heartbeat, but it was a silence born of tension, not of peace. Though Cronus had been poisoned and his children were free, the old order would not surrender the cosmos without a struggle that would threaten to pull the stars from their moorings. This was the beginning of the Titanomachy, the 10-year war between the old gods and the new. It was a clash of fundamental truths. On one side stood the Titans, the firstborn of earth and sky, vast and unyielding, rooted in the ancient ways of power and blood. On the other stood the Olympians, younger, sharper, and driven by a necessity to create a world where law might finally follow force. It was not a war of borders or tribute, but a war for the very soul of existence. The Titans gathered atop Mount Arthres, a peak that had stood since the first cooling of the earth. From that high vantage, they looked down upon the upstarts with the weary contempt of giants. They were led by Cronus, whose heart had turned to cold flint since the day he struck down his father. Beside him stood his brothers. Hyperion, the lord of light who burned with a heat that could wither forests. Iapetus, the pisser, whose strength was as sharp as the spear he carried. Coeus, the inquirer, whose mind moved through the dark like a predatory bird. They were elemental. They were the pillars that held up the world, and they could not imagine a universe that did not bend to their weight. Zeus and his siblings took their stand upon Mount Olympus, a peak to the north that was still wild and unscarred. For 10 years, the two sides traded blows that shattered the landscape. There were no songs written of these early battles, for no mortals existed to hear them, and the gods themselves were too busy trying to survive. When the Titans charged, the earth groaned and cracked. When the Olympians struck back, the sky turned a bruised purple, weeping thunder and rain. But for all their power, the Olympians could not break the stalemate. The Titans were too numerous, too rooted in the ancient stone of the world. It was a war of attrition, and as the 10th year dawned, the Olympians grew weary. Their immortality did not save them from the exhaustion of a conflict that seemed to have no end. It was then that Gaia, the Great Mother, whispered from the depths of the soil. She had watched her children and grandchildren tear at each other for a decade, and her patience had reached its limit. She remembered the children that Uranus had hidden away, the ones Cronus had promised to free but had left in the dark. The Cyclopes and the 100-handed giants. They were still chained in the deepest pits of Tartarus, forgotten by the sky and the sun. Gaia spoke to Zeus in the silence of the night. She told him that victory would not come through the strength of his siblings alone. He must descend. He must go into the abyss where no light reaches and release the monsters that even the Titans feared. Zeus, though a king, was not afraid to walk in the dark. He journeyed to the gates of Tartarus, a place where the air is thick with the smell of old stone and ancient grief. He slew the dragon camp who guarded the prison, her body a coil of shadows and scales. With her death, the chains fell away. From the darkness stepped the 3 Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges. They were not just giants. They were the ultimate smiths, beings who could forge the very essence of the world into tools of war. In gratitude for their freedom, they did not offer Zeus gold or land. They offered him fire. In the heat of their subterranean forges, the Cyclopes fashioned 3 gifts. For Zeus, they crafted the thunderbolt. Not a mere spear of light, but a weapon of pure, unadulterated power that could split the heavens and turn mountains to dust. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a 3-pronged spear that could stir the oceans to madness and make the earth tremble like a frightened animal. For Hades, they created the helm of darkness. It was a cap that did not just hide the wearer from sight, but removed them from reality itself, allowing Hades to move like a ghost through the ranks of his enemies. But the Cyclopes were not the only ones Zeus freed. From the deepest shadows came the Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones. Cottus, Briareos, and Gyges. Each of them possessed 50 heads and 100 arms, and they moved with a frantic, terrifying energy that defied the senses. When they stood upon the battlefield, they were a wall of moving limbs, capable of throwing 300 stones at once, each the size of a hill. With these allies at his back, Zeus returned to Olympus, and the final movement of the war began. The last battle of the Titanomachy was a cataclysm that nearly unmade the world. The Hecatonchires stood at the forefront, their 300 hands raining down boulders with the speed of a hailstorm. The Titans tried to stand their ground, but for the first time, they were overwhelmed. Then Zeus stepped forward. He raised the thunderbolt, and the sky finally broke. He threw the lightning with a fury that had been building for 10 long years. The heat was so intense that the forests melted and the seas boiled. The Titans were blinded by the radiance, their ancient skins scorched by the fire of a younger, hungrier god. Hades, wearing his helm of darkness, slipped behind the Titan lines, invisible and deadly, sowing confusion and fear. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and the earth beneath Mount Arthries buckled, dragging the Titan fortress into the dust. The Titans fell. One by one, the giants who had ruled the cosmos since the beginning of time were brought to their knees. Cronus, the cunning king, looked upon his son and realized that the prophecy of Uranus had finally caught him. He had been overthrown by his own blood, and the cycle was complete. The Olympians did not show mercy, for they had learned from their father that a defeated enemy is a future threat. They dragged the Titans down into the same pits where the Cyclopes had once languished. They cast them into Tartarus, and the Hecatoncheirs, the very brothers the Titans had betrayed, were set as the eternal jailers. A wall of bronze was built around the abyss, and a gate that could never be opened was sealed. Only a few Titans were spared. Atlas, the brother of Prometheus, was given a different sentence. Because of his great strength and his role as a general in the war, he was condemned to stand at the edge of the world and hold the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders for all eternity. A living pillar, forever separating the sky from the earth. With the Titans gone, the world was a ruin of smoke and broken stone. The victory was won, but the rule was not yet established. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, stood amidst the wreckage and looked out over a universe that was finally their own. They knew that if they fought amongst themselves, they would be no better than the ones they had replaced. So they decided to divide the spoils not by argument, but by fate. They cast lots in a golden helmet, leaving the division of the world to the blind hand of necessity. The lot for the sky fell to Zeus. He became the lord of the heavens, the master of the winds and the clouds, the undisputed king of gods and men. His throne would be the highest peak of Olympus, and his word would be the law that governed the movements of the sun and the stars. The lot for the sea fell to Poseidon. He took dominion over the vast and restless oceans, the rivers that carved the land, and the springs that bubbled from the deep. He became the earth-shaker, a god of temperament as wild and unpredictable as the waves. To Hades fell the lot that many would consider a curse. He became the lord of the underworld, the master of the dead and the guardian of the riches that lay buried beneath the soil. He did not complain, for he was a god of stern and quiet dignity. He moved his court into the shadows, building a kingdom of echoes and silence, where every mortal who had ever lived would eventually find their way. The earth itself, Gaia, was left as common ground for all three, a neutral territory where their influences would overlap and compete. This was the dawn of Olympus. A new order was established, one that was more complex than the simple tyranny of Cronus. Zeus sat upon his throne, but he sat as the head of a council. Beside him were his sisters, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth who kept the eternal flame; Demeter, the goddess of the harvest who ensured the earth remained fertile; and Hera, who would become his queen and the goddess of marriage and power. Together, they began to rebuild. They raised palaces of marble and gold above the clouds, and they began to fill the world with new life, new spirits, and eventually, the first traces of mankind. But Gaia was not yet finished. She had helped Zeus topple the Titans, but she found the new order to be just as restrictive as the old. She saw her children, the Titans, suffering in the dark of Tartarus, and her maternal heart turned once more to vengeance. In the secret places of the world, she bred one final monster, Typhon. He was a creature of such size and terror that his head brushed the stars and his wings darkened the sun. He was the last test for the new kings. But that is a struggle for another hour. For now, the heavens are clear. The war is over, and the Olympians look down upon their kingdom with eyes that have seen the end of time and the beginning of everything else. With the war ended and the Titans cast down into the hollows of the earth, the world found a new stillness. But it was not the stillness of peace. It was the heavy, expectant silence that follows a storm, the kind that waits for a new voice to speak. The sky was now a vast, open blue, no longer pressed so tightly against the earth. The sea had found its boundaries, and the mountains stood tall and unburdened. At the highest point of all, where the air is thin and the sun strikes first in the morning and lingers last at night, stood Mount Olympus. It was more than a mountain. It was a threshold, a place where the stone of the earth met the light of the heavens. Here, the victors of the Great War gathered to build their home. They were the Olympians, 12 in number, and their names would become the heartbeat of a civilization yet to be born. They did not build with wood or clay, but with the materials of myth itself. Their halls were of marble and cloud, their floors paved with starlight and the echoes of thunder. The gates of Olympus were guarded by the seasons, 3 sisters who moved the clouds aside to let the gods pass and closed them to hide the divine light from mortal eyes. In these halls, there was no rain, no snow, no wind that bit with cold. There was only the eternal summer of the divine, a place of nectar and ambrosia, where the gods feasted while the world below struggled through the dust of time. At the center of it all stood 12 thrones, and on those thrones sat the masters of the cosmos. First among them, seated upon a throne of polished cedar and ivory, was Zeus. He was the king of gods and men, the lord of the sky and the master of the thunderbolt. He was not a king who ruled through kindness alone, but through the memory of his own strength and the weight of his judgment. In his hand, he carried the weapon forged by the Cyclopes, a bolt of lightning that could split the mountains and boil the sea. His eagle sat beside him, watching the world with eyes that saw every oath broken and every law upheld. Zeus was the father of the order, the one who divided the realms and kept the balance. But he was also a god of restless appetites. His presence was like the sky itself, sometimes clear and protecting, other times dark with a storm that no mortal could survive. Beside him, on a throne of silver, sat Hera. She was his sister and his queen, the goddess of marriage, of queenship, and of the sacred bonds that hold a family together. Her beauty was regal and cold, her eyes as sharp as the peacock feathers that adorned her sacred birds. Hera was the guardian of the home, but she was also a goddess of profound and enduring memory. She did not forget a slight, and she did not forgive a betrayal. In a world where Zeus was a wandering wind, Hera was the unyielding earth. Her power was the power of the vow, the invisible threads that bind a king to his people and a husband to his wife. When she spoke, even Zeus listened, for her wrath was a slow and freezing fire that could haunt a bloodline for generations. To the right of the king sat Poseidon, the lord of the deep. His throne was of coral and shimmering pearl, and his scent was the salt and spray of the endless ocean. Though he shared in the rule of the world, Poseidon was never truly at home on the mountain. His heart belonged to the restless waves and the dark trenches where the light never reaches. He carried the trident, a 3-pronged spear that could stir the tides or shatter the very foundations of the earth. He was the shaker of the ground, the father of horses, and a god of temperaments as shifting as the sea. One moment he was the calm of a summer harbor, and the next he was the fury of a winter gale, swallowing ships and islands in a fit of divine pique. Then there was Demeter, the goddess of the grain and the green earth. Her throne was carved from the wood of the fruit tree and draped in golden stalks of wheat. She was the one who taught men how to plough the soil, how to sow the seed, and how to harvest the bounty of the seasons. Without her, the world was a desert. Demeter was the mother of life, her hands always smelling of rich earth and rain. But she was also a goddess of profound sorrow. She carried the weight of her daughter, Persephone, who spent half the year in the dark kingdom of the dead. It was this grief that gave the world its seasons, the cold death of winter being the shadow of a mother mourning, and the bright birth of spring being her joy returned. Near her sat Athena, who had no mother, for she had sprung fully grown and armored from the forehead of Zeus himself. Her throne was of cold, grey stone, and her eyes were the color of a winter owl. She was the goddess of wisdom, of strategy, and of the kind of war that is fought with the mind rather than just the spear. While others might revel in the chaos of battle, Athena moved with the precision of a craftsman. She was the patron of cities, the inventor of the loom and the plough, and the protector of heroes who used their wits to survive. She was the cold clarity of thought, the virgin warrior who needed no husband and feared no god. In contrast to Athena's cool reason was Ars, the god of war. His throne was covered in the skin of his enemies and smelled of iron and blood. He was the son of Zeus and Hera, but even his parents looked upon him with a measure of disgust. Ars was the god of the scream, the crash of the shield, and the raw, unthinking fury of slaughter. He did not care for strategy or justice. He cared only for the heat of the fight and the red mist that descends when a man forgets his humanity. He was the god that men prayed to when they were desperate, but he was a god that no one truly loved. He was the necessary storm of violence that lived in the heart of the world. Far more radiant was Apollo, the god of light, music, and prophecy. His throne was of gold, and he carried a silver bow and a golden lyre. He was the sun made flesh, the god who spoke through the oracles and guided the hands of healers. Apollo was the patron of the arts, the one who brought order to the world through the beauty of song and the truth of the word. But he was also a god of terrible distance. His arrows brought plague as easily as they brought protection, and his light could blind as easily as it could reveal. He was the ideal of the young man, perfect in form but often cold in spirit, a god who saw the future but could not always change the tragedy of the present. His twin sister, Artemis, sat upon a throne of white birch. She was the goddess of the moon, of the hunt, and of the wild places where no plough had ever touched. While her brother lived in the cities and the temples, Artemis roamed the forests with her bow of silver and her pack of hounds. She was the protector of the young and the guardian of the virginity of the woods. She was a goddess of silver light and quick movements, as silent as the deer and as dangerous as the bear. She asked for nothing from men and gave nothing in return, except for the solitude of the mountain and the sacred silence of the night. Then there was Hephaestus, the smith of the gods. His throne was a marvel of mechanical genius, made of every metal known to man and god, and it was the only one that moved. He was the son of Hera, born lame and cast from the heights of Olympus by his own mother in a fit of shame. He fell for an entire day and night before striking the sea, and he lived thereafter in the fire of the volcano. He was the god of the forge, the one who made the armor of Achilles, the palace of the gods, and the very thunderbolts of Zeus. His hands were calloused and his face was stained with soot, but he was the most indispensable of the Olympians. He was the power of the fire that creates, the intellect that bends the world to its will through craft and toil. By a trick of the gods, Hephaestus was married to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Her throne was of gold and ivory, and it smelled of roses and the sea. She was not born of any mother, but had risen from the foam of the sea where the blood of the sky had fallen. She was the most beautiful of all the immortals, and her smile could undo the resolve of the strongest hero. She was the goddess of desire, of the pulse in the blood, and the sweet madness that makes men forget their homes and their kings. Aphrodite was the softest of the gods, yet her power was perhaps the most destructive, for love is a fire that can burn a city to the ground as easily as it can warm a hearth. Moving through the halls with winged sandals was Hermes, the messenger. His throne was of bronze, and he carried the caduceus, a staff entwined with serpents. He was the son of Zeus and a nymph of the mountain, a god born in a cave who had stolen the cattle of Apollo before he was even a day old. Hermes was the god of boundaries, of travelers, of thieves, and of the merchants who crossed the world. He was the only god who could move freely between the light of Olympus and the dark of the underworld, guiding the souls of the dead to their final rest. He was the trickster, the diplomat, and the quick tongue that could solve any problem with a well-placed lie. Finally, there was Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. Her throne was not a throne at all, but a simple seat beside the central fire of Olympus. She was the eldest of the siblings and the quietest. She sought no wars, no lovers, and no grand temples. Her power was the power of the center, the eternal flame that must never go out. She was the goddess of the home, the one who ensured that every meal was sacred and every guest was safe. In later days, she would give up her place among the 12 to Dionysus, the god of the vine and of madness, preferring the silence of the fire to the bickering of the court. But for as long as the gods ruled, Hestia was the one who held the house together. These were the 12. They were a family, though a dysfunctional and dangerous one. They quarreled, they betrayed each other, they fell in love, and they vied for power. But together, they formed the order of the world. They were the architects of the age of heroes, the watchers of the cities, and the ones who decided the fate of every mortal soul. They lived in a world of nectar and ambrosia, high above the clouds, but their eyes were always turned downward toward the earth. For the gods are nothing without the stories of men, and the stories of men are nothing without the thundering shadows of the gods. On Mount Olympus, the thrones were set, and the long, glittering reign of the 12 had begun. In the long, quiet era after the Titans were cast down and the smoke of the Great War had finally cleared, the world was a sprawling, silent wilderness. The gods were seated on their thrones of marble and cloud. The seas had been divided, the sky was claimed, and the underworld was sealed. But the earth itself was empty. There were no voices to sing the praises of the gods. There were no hands to till the soil. There was no one to look up at the stars and wonder why they burned. The world was a stage without players. It was a masterpiece with no audience. It was during this time that Zeus turned to the 2 sons of the Titan Iapetus who had not fought against him. These were the brothers Prometheus and Epimetheus. Their names carry a heavy meaning that explains everything that was to follow. Prometheus means forethought. He was the one who looked ahead, the one who saw the storm before the clouds gathered, the one who understood the consequences of every action. His brother, Epimetheus, was the opposite. His name means afterthought. He was impulsive, acting first and thinking later, often finding himself standing in the wreckage of his own mistakes. Zeus gave these 2 brothers a divine task. They were to populate the earth with living things. They were to craft creatures from the clay of the world and give them the gifts they would need to survive. Epimetheus, in his typical haste, begged his brother to let him distribute the attributes alone. Prometheus, perhaps out of a weary brotherly love, agreed. And so Epimetheus began. He gave the lion its claws and its roar. He gave the eagle its wings and its sharp, searching eyes. He gave the turtle its heavy shell and the deer its incredible speed. He gave the bear its fur against the winter and the horse its powerful legs. He was generous and fast, moving through the world like a whirlwind of creation. But by the time he reached the final creature, he realized his great mistake. He had been too generous. He had used up every gift. There were no more claws left. There was no more fur. There was no more speed or strength or sharp teeth. And standing there, naked and shivering in the cold mud of the world, was man. Epimetheus looked at this weak, defenseless thing and realized he had nothing left to give. He turned to his brother in despair. Prometheus looked upon the shivering creature and felt a deep, unyielding pity. He saw in man a spark of something that the animals lacked. He decided to take over the work. He shaped man with more care, standing him upright so that he might look at the heavens rather than the dirt. He fashioned man in the image of the gods themselves, giving him a mind that could reason and a heart that could feel. But man was still cold. Man was still weak. Man was hiding in caves, terrified of the night and the beasts that Epimetheus had armed so well. Prometheus went to Zeus and asked for a gift that would level the playing field. He asked for fire, but Zeus refused. Zeus was a jealous king, and he was a fearful one. He remembered how his own father had been overthrown. He saw in man a potential for greatness that he found threatening. If mortals had fire, he reasoned, they would become too much like the gods. They would become independent. They would stop looking to the sky for protection. He told Prometheus that man must remain in the dark. He said that man was meant to be a servant, not a rival. But Prometheus was not a god of blind obedience. He was a god of forethought and, more importantly, a god of rebellion. He knew that without fire, man would surely perish. And so, he chose to defy the King of Heaven. He climbed the heights of Mount Olympus, silent and unseen. He carried with him a hollow stalk of giant fennel. When the sun god, Helios, drove his chariot across the sky, or perhaps from the very forge of Hephaestus, Prometheus reached out and caught a single spark of the divine flame. He hid it within the stalk and carried it down to earth, hidden in the hollow wood. When he reached the caves of man, he showed them the gift. He taught them how to feed the flame, how to keep it alive through the night. For the first time, the darkness retreated. With fire came warmth. With fire came the ability to cook food and harden tools. With fire came the birth of all craft, all art, and all civilization. Man began to build. Man began to dream. The fire stealer had given humanity the one thing that made them more than animals. He had given them the spark of the divine. Zeus looked down from Olympus and saw the smoke rising from the earth. He saw the lights in the valleys where there should have been only shadow. His fury was like a storm that shook the foundations of the world. He could not take the fire back, for once a gift is given and used, it becomes part of the world. But he could punish the one who stole it. And he could punish the ones who received it. For Prometheus, Zeus prepared a torment that was meant to last for eternity. He had the Titan carried to the highest, most jagged peaks of the Caucasus Mountains. There, the god of the forge, Hephaestus, was ordered to chain Prometheus to the rock. The chains were not of iron, but of adamantine, unyielding and unbreakable. Prometheus was pinned to the stone, unable to move, unable to sleep. And every day, an eagle, a massive bird of prey, would descend from the sky. It would tear open the Titan's flesh and feast upon his liver. Because Prometheus was immortal, his liver would grow back every night in the cold mountain air. And every morning, the eagle would return. This was the price of his love for humanity. He remained there for ages, his screams echoing through the canyons, a silent witness to the progress of the man he had saved. He never repented. He never begged for mercy. He knew that his gift had changed the world forever, and in his forethought, he knew that his suffering would one day find its end. But that is a story for another time. Zeus was not finished. He turned his attention to man. He did not want to destroy them, for he still desired their worship and their sacrifices. Instead, he wanted to complicate their lives. He wanted to ensure that their newfound fire would come with a price. He called upon the gods to create a gift that was a curse in disguise. Hephaestus molded a woman from the earth, more beautiful than any mortal could imagine. Aphrodite gave her grace and charm. Athena gave her the skill of weaving and the gift of wisdom. Hermes gave her a silver tongue and a curious mind. They named her Pandora, which means all-gifted. Zeus sent her down to earth as a bride for Epimetheus. Prometheus, even in his chains, had warned his brother never to accept a gift from the gods. But Epimetheus, true to his name, forgot the warning the moment he saw her. He welcomed her into his home. Pandora brought with her a great jar, a vessel sealed and heavy. She had been told never to open it. She had been told that its contents were not for mortal eyes. But the gods had given her curiosity. They had built it into her very soul. Every day, she looked at the jar. She wondered what treasure it might hold. Perhaps it was gold. Perhaps it was a gift that would make man even greater than fire had. One afternoon, when the house was quiet, she could resist no longer. She reached out and broke the seal. She lifted the lid, just a fraction. In that moment, a dark, rushing wind burst from the jar. It was not gold. It was not light. It was every sorrow and every evil that the world had never known. Out flew sickness. Out flew old age and toil. Out flew madness, envy, and greed. Out flew death itself, a cold and shadow-winged thing. These spirits swarmed into the air, spreading across the earth, finding their way into every home and every heart. The golden age of man was over. The world was no longer a place of endless spring and easy peace. Pandora, terrified, slammed the lid back down. But the jar was empty, save for one tiny thing that had been hiding at the very bottom. It was hope. Zeus had placed it there as the final irony, or perhaps as the only mercy. Though the world was now filled with pain and suffering, though man would now grow old and sick and die, they would always have hope to keep them moving forward. They would always believe that the next day might be better than the last. This was the legacy of the fire stealer and the curiosity of the first woman. It was a world of fire and shadow, of progress and pain. As we look at the making of mortal man, we must also look at the ages that followed. The poets tell us that humanity did not appear all at once in its current form. Instead, there were 5 ages, each one a step away from the divine. First was the Golden Age. This was the time of Cronus, when men lived like gods. They did not work. They did not age. They spent their days in feasting and laughter. When they died, it was as if they were simply falling asleep. They were the beloved of the earth, and when their age passed, they became the guardian spirits who wander the world, invisible and kind, watching over the justice of men. Then came the Silver Age, created by the Olympians. These men were less noble. They spent 100 years as children, staying at their mothers' sides, and when they finally grew up, their lives were short and full of strife. They were arrogant. They refused to sacrifice to the gods or honor the heavens. Zeus, in his anger, buried them beneath the earth. They are the blessed spirits of the underworld, second only to the golden ones. Third was the Bronze Age. These were men of war. They were made from the ash trees, hard and unyielding. They ate no bread, living only for battle. Their houses were of bronze, their armor was of bronze, and they worked only with bronze, for iron had not yet been found. They were so violent, so filled with rage, that they eventually destroyed one another. They descended into the cold, dark house of Hades without leaving a name behind. Then came a strange and brief departure from the decline. The Fourth Age was the Age of Heroes. These were the demigods, the men of legend who fought at Thebes and Troy. They were nobler and more courageous than the race of bronze. They were the ones who sat at the tables of the gods and did deeds that would be sung for thousands of years. When they fell, Zeus granted them a place in the Isles of the Blessed, at the very edges of the world, where they live in a land of 3 harvests a year, free from sorrow. And finally, we come to the Fifth Age, the Age of Iron. This is the age in which we live. It is an age of unceasing toil and grief. The poets say that in this age, fathers will have no peace with their children, nor guests with their hosts, nor friends with friends. It is an age where might is right and the good man is punished while the wicked man is praised. We are told that one day, when even the newborn have grey hair on their temples, Zeus will destroy this race as well. But remember the jar. Remember the bottom of the vessel. We live in the Age of Iron, yes. We live with the sickness and the toil that Pandora released. But we also live with the fire that Prometheus stole. We have the spark of reason. We have the ability to build, to create, and to hope. We are the legacy of a titan who was willing to suffer forever so that we might have a chance to be more than shadows in the dark. As the gods settled into their roles and the mortals began to spread across the earth, the stage was set for the great stories of the heroes. The world was no longer a place of just elements and titans. It was a place of struggle. It was a place where a mortal man, armed with a bit of stolen fire and a heart full of hope, could look up at the gods on Olympus and say, "I am here. I am thinking. I am alive." And that, perhaps, is the greatest myth of all. The gods were now secure on their high marble thrones. The sky was ruled by Zeus, the sea by Poseidon, and the dark deeps by Hades. But the world below was not silent. It was a place of wild forests, of unmapped mountains, and of men who were beginning to build the first great cities of the earth. These mortals were fragile. Their lives were short and their strength was limited. But they possessed something the gods did not. A capacity for struggle that was born from their own mortality. And the gods, watching from above, were drawn to this flame. They began to descend. They came not as kings, but as lovers and as strangers. They mixed their divine blood with the clay of humanity, and from these unions, the age of heroes was born. It was a time of wonders and of horrors, where the impossible became the everyday, and where a man might walk with the gods if his heart was bold enough and his spirit was strong enough. The first of these great legends was Perseus. His story began in a room of bronze, buried deep beneath the earth. His grandfather, King Acrisius, lived in terror of a prophecy that said his daughter's son would one day take his life. To prevent this, he locked his daughter Danae away in a dark, metallic tomb where no man could reach her. But no wall is thick enough to keep out the will of Zeus. The king of the gods came to her as a shower of gold, falling through the cracks in the ceiling, and from that golden rain, Perseus was conceived. When the king discovered the child, he dared not kill him outright, for fear of the furies who haunt those who spill their own blood. Instead, he placed the mother and the infant in a wooden chest and cast them out into the sea. He hoped the waves would do what he could not. But the gods watched over that small vessel. It drifted to the shores of a peaceful island, where they were found by a fisherman who gave them a home. Perseus grew into a man of quiet strength, but his destiny would not allow him to remain a fisherman's son. A cruel king, desiring his mother, sought to send Perseus to his death. He commanded the youth to bring him the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose face was so hideous that any who looked upon her were turned instantly to stone. It was a quest that seemed certain to end in a statue of cold rock. But Perseus was not alone. The gods gave him gifts. Hermes gave him winged sandals to fly. Athena gave him a shield polished like a mirror. Hades lent him the helm of darkness that made him invisible. With these, he flew to the edge of the world, where the night never ends. He did not look at Medusa directly. He watched her reflection in his shield, and with one swift stroke, he severed her head. From her blood sprang the winged horse Pegasus, and Perseus flew home, using the head to turn his enemies to stone and rescuing the princess Andromeda from a sea monster along the way. In the end, fate found his grandfather. During an athletic game, Perseus threw a disc that went wide, striking an old man in the crowd. It was Acrisius, dying exactly as the oracle had whispered years before. Perseus became a king, but his true legacy was the beginning of the age of the hero, the man who faces the impossible and returns. But as the cities grew, so did the dangers that lurked in their shadows. No legend is more tangled or more famous than that of Theseus and the labyrinth. Theseus was a prince of Athens, though he was raised in a distant land. When he came of age, he traveled to his father's city, clearing the road of bandits and monsters, earning his reputation with every step. But when he arrived, he found a city in mourning. Every 9 years, Athens was forced to send a tribute to the island of Crete. 7 young men and 7 young women were shipped across the sea to be devoured by the Minotaur. This creature was a horror born of shame and divine punishment. It had the body of a man and the head of a bull, and it lived in the labyrinth, a maze so complex that no one who entered could ever find their way out. Theseus volunteered to go as one of the victims. He did not intend to be a meal. He intended to be a slayer. When he reached Crete, he met the princess Ariadne. She fell in love with the bold Athenian and gave him the secret to surviving the maze. It was not a weapon, but a simple ball of thread. Theseus tied the end to the entrance and unspooled it as he walked deeper into the darkness. He found the Minotaur at the heart of the labyrinth, a place where the air was thick with the scent of old blood and damp stone. They fought in the shadows, and Theseus, using his bare hands and the strength of his resolve, killed the beast. He followed the thread back to the light, led his people to their ships, and sailed away. But his return was marked by tragedy. He had promised his father that if he was successful, he would change the black sails of his ship to white. In his joy, or perhaps his exhaustion, he forgot. His father, seeing the black sails on the horizon, believed his son was dead and threw himself into the sea. Theseus became a great king, the founder of Athenian democracy, but he lived with the knowledge that even the greatest victory carries a price. While Theseus built a city, another hero was gathering a crew for the greatest voyage the world had ever known. Jason was a prince whose throne had been stolen by his uncle, the cunning Peleus. To reclaim his birthright, Jason was commanded to bring back the golden fleece from the distant land of Colchis. This was the skin of a sacred ram, nailed to an oak tree in a grove guarded by a dragon that never slept. Jason did not go alone. He called for the bravest men in Greece to join him. They came from every corner of the land. Heracles was there, with his massive club. Orpheus was there, with his lyre that could charm the stones. Castor and Pollux, the twin sons of Zeus, joined the crew. They named their ship the Argo, and they were the Argonauts. Their journey was a long trail of wonders and terrors. They sailed through the clashing rocks that crushed any ship that dared to pass. They fought harpies and giants. They crossed seas that were unknown to any map. When they reached Colchis, Jason was aided by Medea, a sorceress and the daughter of the king. She was a woman of dark and terrible power. She gave Jason the potions he needed to yoke fire-breathing bulls and the spells to put the dragon to sleep. Jason took the fleece and fled with Medea, but their love was built on blood and betrayal. Medea killed her own brother to aid their escape, and when they finally returned to Greece, her magic was used to destroy Jason's enemies in ways that were too horrific to speak of. Jason eventually turned away from her, and in her rage, she destroyed everything he held dear. The hero of the Argo died an old man, crushed by the rotting timber of his own ship as it sat abandoned on the shore. It was a reminder that even those who touch the gold of the gods can be broken by the darkness of their own choices. But the shadow of all these men was eclipsed by the greatest of them all, Heracles. He was the son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene, and from the moment of his birth, he was hunted by Hera. The queen of the gods hated him because he was a living reminder of her husband's unfaithfulness. She sent madness upon him, a fog of the mind that caused him to kill his own family in a blind rage. When the fog cleared and he saw the blood on his hands, Heracles was a man shattered. He went to the oracle at Delphi, seeking a way to wash his soul clean. He was told to serve the king Eurystheus for 12 years and to perform the tasks he was given. These became the 12 labors of Heracles. He was sent to kill the Nemean lion, a beast with a hide that no arrow could pierce. Heracles strangled it with his bare hands and wore its skin as a cloak. He was sent to destroy the Hydra, a serpent with many heads that grew back 2 for every one that was cut. He was sent to capture the golden hind of Artemis and to bring back the 3-headed dog Cerberus from the very gates of the underworld. He cleaned the stables of 1,000 cattle in a single day by rerouting 2 rivers. He traveled to the ends of the earth to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides. Each labor was a descent into pain, a test of a strength that was more than physical. Heracles suffered. He bled. He labored under the sun and in the dark of the abyss. But with every task, he became less of a man and more of a legend. He was the protector of humanity, the one who fought the monsters so that others could live in peace. When his mortal life ended, consumed by a poison robe and a funeral pyre, Zeus did not let him go to the grey fields of Hades. He brought him up to Olympus and made him a god. Heracles was the ultimate hero, the one who proved that through struggle and suffering, a man could reach the stars. These were the legends of the Golden Age. They were men of grand ambition and deep flaws. They were capable of the highest honor and the most terrible violence. They were the bridge between the old world of elemental titans and the coming world of men. They taught us that the world is a dangerous place, filled with labyrinths and dragons and madness, but that it is also a place where a single man, armed with a thread or a shield or a club, can change the course of destiny. They were the children of the gods, but their stories belong to us. They are the myths that remind us that even when the darkness is deep and the maze is long, there is a way back to the light if we have the courage to keep walking. The heroes had carved their names into the earth. They had cleared the paths and built the walls. But a new storm was gathering on the horizon. A war was coming that would draw every hero and every god into its flames. A war that would begin with an apple and end with the fall of a city. The time of the heroes was reaching its peak, and the world was about to change forever. The age of heroes did not end with a whisper. It ended with a roar that shook the foundations of both earth and heaven. We have seen the birth of the gods, the rise of the titans, and the many labors of those born of divine blood. But tonight we reach the final chapter, the great crescendo of the mythic world. This is the story of the Trojan War, a conflict so vast it required the intervention of almost every god on Olympus and resulted in the twilight of the heroes. It was a war born of beauty and pride, but it ended in ash and the slow, silent withdrawal of the divine from the affairs of men. It began not on a battlefield, but at a wedding. Peleus, a mortal king, was to marry Thetis, a sea nymph of such beauty that both Zeus and Poseidon had once desired her. But a prophecy had warned that Thetis would bear a son greater than his father, and so the gods, fearing for their thrones, decreed she must marry a mortal man. To this wedding, every deity was invited, save for one. Eris, the goddess of discord, was left outside the gates. In her malice, she fashioned a golden apple, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest," and tossed it into the midst of the feast. The apple became a seed of ruin. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed the prize, and the dispute became so bitter that Zeus refused to judge it. Instead, he sent the goddesses to the slopes of Mount Ida, where a Trojan prince named Paris lived as a shepherd. Paris had been cast out of Troy as an infant because of a dream that he would one day burn the city, but fate has a way of finding those who try to hide. The goddesses appeared before him, each offering a bribe for his favor. Hera offered him power over nations. Athena offered him wisdom and victory in every battle. But Aphrodite offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris, young and driven by desire, chose the apple for Aphrodite. That woman was Helen, the daughter of Zeus and Leda, and the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. When Paris traveled to Sparta under the guise of peace, he violated the sacred laws of hospitality and fled with Helen across the sea to Troy. Menelaus was not a man to suffer such an insult in silence. He turned to his brother, Agamemnon, the high king of Mycenae, who saw in this betrayal an opportunity to expand his own power. Because of an old oath sworn by the suitors of Helen, every king and hero in Greece was bound to join the cause. A fleet of 1,000 ships gathered at the port of Aulis, their sails white against the blue water, their spears gleaming like a forest of bronze. But the gods were already demanding a price. The winds refused to blow, and the fleet sat idle until Agamemnon sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, to appease the goddess Artemis. It was a dark omen for a dark war. The Greeks sailed to the shores of Troy and laid siege to the city, but the walls of Troy were strong, built by the hands of gods and defended by Hector, the noble prince who carried the weight of his city on his shoulders. For 9 long years, the Greeks and Trojans fought in a stalemate. The gods themselves took sides, descending from Olympus to join the fray. Hera and Athena fought for the Greeks, while Apollo and Aphrodite protected the Trojans. Ares, the god of war, changed sides as the blood moved him, finding joy in the chaos. The 10th year of the war brought the most famous of all quarrels. Agamemnon, arrogant and stubborn, insulted Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors. Achilles, the son of Peleus and Thetis, was a man of fire and shadow, fated to die young but with eternal glory. In his rage, Achilles withdrew from the battle, and without his spear, the Greeks began to fall. The Trojans, led by Hector, pushed the Greeks back to their very ships, setting the wooden hulls ablaze. It was only the death of Patroclus, the dearest companion of Achilles, that brought the great hero back to the field. Patroclus had donned the armor of Achilles to rally the troops, but he was struck down by Hector. The grief of Achilles was a physical force. It was said that he howled like a wounded animal, and his mother, Thetis, brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself. Achilles returned to the battlefield not as a man, but as a demon of vengeance. He slaughtered so many Trojans that the river Scamander rose up in anger, choked with the bodies of the dead. Finally, Achilles met Hector beneath the walls of the city. It was a duel that would decide the fate of Troy. Hector fought with the courage of a man defending his home, but Achilles fought with the power of a god. He struck Hector down and, in his madness, dragged the body behind his chariot around the city for 12 days. The war might have ended there, but the gods were not finished. Achilles himself was eventually killed, struck in the heel by an arrow guided by Apollo. The Greeks, weary and broken, realized that Troy would never fall to strength alone. It was Odysseus, the king of Ithaca and a man of many wiles, who conceived the final trick. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse and left it on the shore, pretending to sail away in defeat. Inside the belly of the horse, a small band of warriors hid in the dark. The Trojans, believing the horse to be a gift to the gods, dragged it inside their gates and celebrated their supposed victory. That night, as the city slept, the Greeks crept out of the horse and opened the gates for their returned fleet. Troy was given to the fire. The temples were looted, the men were slaughtered, and the women were taken as spoils of war. King Priam was killed at his own altar, and the infant son of Hector was thrown from the walls. It was a victory of ash and bone. The gods, looking down at the ruin of the city they had once loved, felt a sudden, cold distance. The age of heroes had reached its bloody end. The return home, known as the returns or the nostoi, was just as bitter as the war. Agamemnon returned to his palace only to be murdered in his bath by his wife, Clytemnestra, who had never forgiven him for the sacrifice of their daughter. Odysseus wandered the seas for 10 years, losing all his men to monsters and storms, before returning to his island alone. Menelaus and Helen lived out their days in a marriage of silence and regret. The heroes who had fought at Troy were scattered to the winds, their lineages broken, their kingdoms fading. With the fall of Troy, the voice of the gods began to grow quiet. The age of myth was giving way to the age of men. No longer would the gods walk the earth in human form, taking sides in mortal squabbles. The oracles would become more cryptic, the omens more rare. The world was becoming a place of iron and history rather than bronze and legend. The heroic blood that had produced men like Heracles and Achilles was thinning, replaced by the labor and toil of ordinary lives. But the story did not truly end. The fall of Troy became the seed of new myths. Aeneas, a Trojan prince, escaped the burning city and traveled west, carrying his aged father on his back and his household gods in his hands. It was his journey that would eventually lead to the founding of Rome, a new power that would claim the legacy of the Greeks for its own. The gods of Olympus would be renamed, their stories translated into Latin, but their essence remained. They became the silent architects of empires, distant figures etched into the marble of the future. As the sun set on the heroic age, the world looked different. The monsters were mostly gone, hidden in the dark corners of the world. The great deeds of the demigods were recorded in poems and songs, stories to be told by firelight while the iron plows turned the earth. The sky was still the domain of Zeus, the sea still the realm of Poseidon, but the gods had retreated to the high peaks of Olympus, watching the world with a detachment they had never known before. The fall of the spear marked the boundary between the dream and the memory. We tell these stories today not because we believe the gods will descend to help us, but because we recognize ourselves in their pride, their love, and their grief. The Trojan War was the final act of a long drama, a reminder that even the greatest heroes are bound by fate, and even the most beautiful cities must one day turn to dust. The spear has fallen, the fires of Troy have gone cold, and the gods have stepped back into the stars. But in the telling of their story, they remain as vibrant as the day they first rose from the chaos. And so, we leave the world of myth behind and enter the world of memory. The heroes are in the earth, the gods are in the heavens, and we are left with the echoes of their names. The journey that began with the yawning void of chaos has ended in the silence of the history books. But as long as the wind blows across the ruins of the ancient world, and as long as we look at the stars and wonder, the gods of Greece will never truly be gone. They are the stories we tell to explain why we love, why we fight, and why we always, in the end, look toward the horizon. Good night.